All right, we're ready to start again. Dr. Debbie Ozment, and she is speaking The Gut Starts Here, which I'm so glad about because I was talking about this a long time ago, and it's nice to have somebody to back that up. Thank you so much for being here.
Okay, thank you, Sandra. It's just a joy to be here. I'm Debbie Ozment. I thank you all for coming out today. I'm going to talk about the gut starts here. Now, I'm a dentist, so please don't leave. You know, I did spend 4 years in school learning about 28 teeth, really, but went back to school to functional medicine training, and that has changed everything. Here's my disclaimer. I'm just going to give you some educational advice, and that's all we're here for. I want to tell you about two of my very favorite dead guys. Now, this is Antoine Béchamp and Louis Pasteur. How many of you all have heard of Louis Pasteur? Now, maybe you've heard of Antoine Béchamp too, because he's really our hero. Of course, they were men in the mid-1800s who had a bitter rivalry, like a lot of things that are happening these days. Now, Louis Pasteur had friends in big places. He had very powerful friends, and you probably know him for pasteurization. He was given much of the credit for the germ theory, and he also developed a lot of vaccines that actually were attenuated vaccines, different kinds of vaccines than we have now. Some did a good job, but he did with these powerful friends he had. They soon learned that these vaccines were income that was going to happen for years and years and years. Well, Antoine Béchamp, he did not agree. He didn't agree with Louis. Louis thought, if there's a germ, you better be scared of this germ. How familiar does that sound these days? So, you have to worry about the germ. And so that's where the germ theory came from. Now, Dr. Béchamp, he said, no, you don't have to worry about the germ. You just have to worry about the terrain. The terrain is if you're well hydrated, if you're well rested, if you have plenty of nutrients, it's the terrain that's going to keep you from needing to worry about the germ. Well, obviously, we all have heard of Louis Pasteur. We haven't heard much about Antoine Béchamp, but there's much more to the story that I'm going to tell you later. We want to talk about health span when, in terms of PANS, PANDAS, any of these autoimmune diseases, any of the post-COVID problems that we're suffering from, they all have to do with health span. So, we have about a 79-year lifespan in the United States. That had been increasing for quite a few years. Lately, it's decreasing, and it's not just because of COVID. It's because of these chronic inflammatory diseases that people are dealing with. These are things that, they don't kill you right away, but they cause you to start spending all your money at the doctor. They cause you to have a lot of doctor's appointments. And it's actually this change in health span that sent me back to school probably about 15 years ago. I've been a dentist since 1985, but I started noticing that my patients were suffering from shorter health spans. They would come in and they might have, 35 years ago, a 60-year-old might be taking one medicine, but now they come in with this long list. So we want to talk about health span because health span impacts relationships. It's all about relationships. And what happens is, even though you have a 79-year lifespan, the average health span is shrinking to somewhere around 63 years. So that's exactly what you all have seen. And of course, when you were dealing with children, that can even be much, much shorter. So we want to develop this long health span. I now call it a vitality span because that's really what it boils down to. I had some training in wellness coaching at Mayo Clinic, and this was etched in granite. A sick man is not a wagon to be taken apart and repaired in pieces, but to be viewed as a whole. So that's what we're out here doing today. At Hee Haw for Health, we have all these different health practitioners, and we want to look at this God-given, incredible body as body, soul, and spirit. We are not just, a mouth. We are not just a kidney or a heart or anything else. I can't see my slides. Oh, this is just a slide that talks about how in medicine we have siloed everything. You have your heart doctor, you have your dermatologist, you have your gastroenterologist, you have your dentist, and nobody talks. And for sure, nobody talks to the dentist, because when I call the heart hospital, they say, "Why are you calling me? You're a dentist. Don't you just deal with the teeth? Don't you just, keep fixing teeth?" And that's quite enough. But what we're suffering from are these diseases of civilization, much like Dr. Govett talked about. These are diseases that are because our environment has changed. Our genetics have not changed, but our environment has totally changed, and it's changing quite rapidly now. So these are things that trigger chronic inflammation, and chronic inflammation is at the base of everything that we're talking about today. Of course, vultures attack, weak animals. So this is just a cartoon. You probably can't see it. Very difficult to see here. But it's just a cartoon that, these vultures knock on the door and say, I heard you were here. So they want to, and this guy just looks like, he is just about to die. So we're talking about inflammaging. Inflammaging is one of the new terms that has a lot of great studies behind it. And we see that every day. You can have somebody who's 40 years old, and they can be very different in terms of their health span or their vitality span than another person who is who's 40 years old. There are some incredible studies. If you want to read about the twin studies from King's College in London, just some amazing things where they have followed identical twins for now over 50 years, and they see how the environment has changed these two people who were born with, who were copies of each other, basically. But because of different environmental factors, their lives have turned out to be very, very different. And that's the concept of inflammaging. And I want to stress that all inflammation is not bad. In our world, so many people take these strong anti-inflammatory agents that actually squelch the good inflammation. It's much like a campfire and a wildfire. We have this campfire over here that is warm, and it gathers people up, and it feels good, and we can cook food over it. It has very much of a purpose. But then when it's time to put that campfire out, you can put it out, and you know that it's out. Very different than the wildfire from yesterday. We don't always know where they start. And that's how these chronic inflammatory problems are in our body. We call them different things, but they're all very, very similar. They're the same inflammatory markers, no matter where they're coming from. So, when you hurt yourself, you know where it is. You stub your toe, it gets swollen, it hurts, it gets red. That's the acute inflammation that is very beneficial. Not all inflammation's bad. So we're talking about chronic inflammation. And I really think chronic inflammation, I quote my dad here, is like your high school boyfriend or girlfriend. Too much of a good thing is not a good thing. So you don't want too much inflammation. You want it to be just right. So, I have a TED Talk. So watch my TED Talk. And it all came about quite by accident. In fact, I thought when they called to ask me to do a TED Talk that it was a joke, because I'm always playing a joke on somebody. And but when I started back to school, I went through a fellowship in anti-aging medicine. I also completed a master's in metabolic nutrition from a medical school. Now, this was a medical school. The whole program was functional medicine. But despite the fact that it was functional medicine and we had to write, 27 case histories, they never mentioned that the mouth was at all involved in these chronic inflammatory problems. So sort of to be a smart aleck, because I was the only dentist in the program, I said, well, I'm going to call my master's thesis The Forgotten Orifice. And that was for sure that they were like, we should not have let you in, Debbie. We knew better. But nevertheless, so I wrote a paper called The Forgotten Orifice, and I think it's on my website, but it just details research thousands. I mean, my paper does not have thousands of articles, but there are thousands of articles about what happens in the mouth impacts the entire body. And I'm here to hopefully convince you that it's very much root cause when it comes to these chronic inflammatory diseases. It absolutely is the forgotten orifice. Bleeding gums. Bleeding gums are so considered to be too normal in our world, like so many things. And bleeding gums are really the canary in the coal mine. In the old days, miners would take a canary down to be able to discern if their air quality was good. So if the canary, croaked, then they would know, okay, it's time for us to get out of here. So hopefully you'll go home today and you'll get a toothpick or some little brush pick and you'll look at your gums very, very critically. And even though you've been told that, a little bleeding is normal, a little bleeding is not normal. A little bleeding is absolutely a sign of something so big happening in your body that it affects every part of your body. And today I'm going to specifically talk about how it affects your gut microbiome. It is huge. Now, this is a sample of a saliva test that I use. This is called Oral DNA MyPeriopath. It checks for 11 different pathogens. Now, this is just a sample test, but when you see, I don't know if you can see, there are some bacteria that are called red complex. Those are bacteria, I thought about this when Dr. Gevitt was talking. These are bacteria that break down the blood-brain barrier. Now, we used to have to guess, but now we don't have to guess. We have DNA now, so we can tell exactly what's happening. The DNA from these bacteria translocate to other parts of the body, and we can find remnants of these DNA from head to toe. They are absolutely in the brain. There's one that is implicated in Alzheimer's disease. They find it in about 40% of postmortem brains that have Alzheimer's. There's one that I'll talk a little bit more about called Fusobacterium nucleatum. It's my favorite bacteria to talk about because it starts in the mouth and it goes to the gut. And it's easy to get rid of, but in the gut, it causes havoc. I call it the mother-in-law bacteria, actually, because it's kind of like a mother-in-law. When it's at low levels, it's very beneficial and it can really do you a lot of good. If I go to my son-in-law's house, my daughter and son-in-law, and I stay for just 2 hours, he still loves me. But if I start saying, Chris, you need to do this, and Chris, can I give you some advice? And Chris, I don't think no, I become Fusobacterium nucleatum. I become an absolute pain in the gut and that's exactly what Fusobacterium is. It's a bacteria that starts in the mouth where it's beneficial at low levels in the bacterial world. That's called its commensal. But if it overgrows, it causes giant problems. So, health starts in the gut, but we know now because of DNA that the gut starts in the mouth. So this is just a picture of a patient that I had early in my. I always want to say early in my transition, and that just means when I started not doing regular dentistry but doing more gut stuff. And my daughter said, "Mama, don't say your transition." But so. When I started going back to school, this was a patient that was referred by a physician. Probably about 90% of my patients are physician referrals. And the physician was afraid that this patient had cancer due to her high C-reactive protein. That's a blood marker that checks for chronic inflammation. And her C-reactive protein was over 18, which is very high. Now with blood tests, you only know if it's over 10. You don't get a specific number anymore. But my point is, she looked very normal in the dental world. If I had looked at her with a different lens, say 30 years ago, I would have just done a regular treatment on her. I would not have realized how significant all of this was. But we did an oral DNA on her, found out exactly what bacteria we had, and then she had some pretty basic treatment. Now, I want you to, if you leave with one thing, know that bleeding gums are not normal. Well, no, bleeding gums are normal, actually, because think about what normal is in our world. Normal is dehydrated, irritated, constipated, frustrated, overscheduled, overstimulated, undernourished, and underrested. Isn't that normal in our world? Really? Because normal just means typical. It just means average. Normal is not what we want to be. So really, maybe bleeding gums are normal, but bleeding gums are not at all where we want to be. So when we started doing, I don't know if you can see the bloody pictures. We love bloody pictures. But she had much more bleeding than we expected. And I'll show you how her blood test came out. You probably can't see it, but when she came in, her C-reactive protein was over 18.1, and lots of things are in the red zone. So her blood sugar was a little dysregulated, her lipids were off. Quite a few things were not good. Did some very simple interceptive treatment, not surgery, not antibiotics, but her C-reactive protein dropped to 2.9. Her blood sugar improved, her lipids improved. Quite a few things scooted over into better areas as far as her metabolic panel, and she didn't have to go through cancer testing. The physician was so afraid that she's had some kind of cancer that they couldn't sniff out that she didn't have to go through cancer testing. So it's amazing when you realize that so much power is in your hands to affect your general health. So let's talk a little bit about gut dysbiosis. Dr. Govett did a great job of this and really kind of set it up for me. This is just a cartoon of leaky gut. Leaky gut is merely when this single cell layer in your gut that's supposed to keep toxins out, keep nutrients in, gets disrupted and opens up. So there's sort of little holes in your gut lining, and when these toxins get back into your system, it stimulates this autoimmune response. Your body's saying, ooh, invader, invader, invader. I've got to mount an inflammatory response to deal with this. And this is where much of this chronic inflammation comes from. When I graduated from dental school in 1985, I don't think I even knew what autoimmunity meant, because it was just, lupus maybe. I mean, it wasn't anything. And then it just starts, I see you shaking your head. It's so true. And then suddenly now, we have a list of 100 autoimmune diseases. And these are not old people diseases. These are young people diseases. This is so big. So we talk about the gut-brain connection. And many of the bacteria that I showed you that are mouth bacteria that we know originate in the mouth, and they have to be treated in the mouth, are impacting this gut-brain connection. Because we know for sure this is true because of DNA. So whatever happens in your gut affects your brain, that affects your mood, that affects your relationships. We're all here because we love somebody, if not lots and lots of people, and we want to live this vibrant life with our loved ones. So it's not just about, being healthy, it's about relationships. And that's what matters. This is just, I can't even see which article this is, but in our home, we have 2 grown children, and they can never move home because their rooms are full of research. I've got probably, 4,000 or 5,000 articles cataloged by topic regarding the inflammatory components of oral microbes, gut microbes, and how it all works together. Back in the slide that was about siloing, I just love to see good research that shows how our bodies are so wonderfully created and all connected, because we see that as doctors every day, but so often in the real world we see it all separated. So this, let's see, what is this one about? This probably is about fusel. This is just oral microbiota, and its role in carcinogenesis. I see a lot of patients with cancer in my clinical practice, and generally there is a an oral component. If it's not just the chronic inflammatory component, it can be a specific bacteria. The specific bacteria involved in cancer, specifically, or the most research is on colorectal cancer, is Fusobacterium. It's that old mother-in-law again. And what happens with Fusobacterium, this is a bacteria that starts in the mouth, translocates to the gut, and there it disrupts the gut. Fusobacterium is found in about almost 100% of the colorectal cancers that are dissected and where they look for it. The thing that we've learned recently that's really impacted my practice is that we know that Fusobacterium inactivates the major chemotherapeutic agent used in colorectal cancer, and that's 5-fluorouracil. You'll hear it called 5-FU. There are incredible studies about how Fusobacterium, a very common oral bacteria that's easy to get rid of, will inactivate 5-fluorouracil. I had a patient in who actually had a colon resection. He had a pump, a 5-fluorouracil pump. We did his treatment, and about that time, I found this research study about how this bacteria inactivates 5-fluorouracil. So and we can test, we do stool testing, and we can find if this bacteria has indeed colonized in the gut. Well, it had in his. We treated him with a very common antibiotic, metronidazole, and lo and behold, Stevenson Cancer Institute said, "Oh my goodness, your chemotherapy is working again." And it was simply because we got rid of the mother-in-law. So I've got some other articles here. This is just a quote by Sherry Rogers. She's a really great doctor. "The road to health is paved with good intestines." And we know that, of course, but we know that to have the road to health paved with good intestines, we also have to have a healthy oral microbiome. And I want to touch here that it's not just the gut. It's just not just the mouth bacteria. It's also root canals that are failing. It's also cavitations. It's also where there are extracted teeth that have been improperly dealt with. And actually, this is a great time. I want to introduce Dr. Cody Dunnington. She's our biological dentist in Oklahoma City. Stand up, Cody. Dr. Dunnington has just opened an incredible new office on Britton and Western. And it is fully equipped with ozone, and she is an expert at dealing with cavitations, root canals that are failing, doing it all totally properly, removing heavy metals. It's just incredible. And I'm just, as of yesterday, moved into office with Dr. Dunnington. So we can really make a big difference for people to deal with the oral microbiome in terms of the rest of the body. There's just quite a few research articles. If you want any research articles, I have a whole bunch on my website, just drdebbiosment.com. And it's what it's what we're learning. We've got so much to learn, and you guys are all learners. To come out on a Saturday, I just appreciate everybody being here. This is just an old poster, actually, about how the mouth impacts other parts of the body, and there are so many things not on here. We know now that it's very much fertility. We know that it's very much Alzheimer's disease, very much brain fog. Autoimmunity is totally tied to the oral microbiome. You name it, and you can lessen your symptoms if you get your mouth healthy. Dr. Govett also kind of touched on epigenetics, as did Becky, and I think this is so key. So often with my patients, they'll come in and they'll say, "Oh, Debbie, diabetes just runs in my family. Diarrhea runs in my family." Somebody really did tell me that. So I was like, "Oh, diarrhea runs in your family." Don't say it that way. But epigenetics is such an exciting field, because whatever your genetics are, you can modify those genetics based on your lifestyle. I have a podcast, and I hope you listen to my podcast. I'm fearless about asking people to to be a guest, and I actually interviewed Dr. Stephanie Seneff on Thursday. She said yes, and I passed out. And when I revived, I emailed her back and said, "Wow." So she was an incredible person. Of course, she is the author of Toxic Legacy. She's also really a world expert in glyphosate metabolism. She's incredible. So she'll be a guest in a couple of weeks. I think that podcast will come out Tuesday. But she also said, "Can I come back, Debbie, and talk about the mRNA vaccines?" So that's her new area of expertise. So she'll be on the podcast doing that too. And she talks a lot about epigenetics and how we can really modify our health span, based on our microbiome. She is quite an incredible person. Let's see. And here's just another cartoon that just shows epigenetics. And it's not changing everything. I appreciate what Becky said. It's not, you don't have to just go from 0 to 100 miles an hour. You just have to start somewhere. Just anything you can do to start decreasing your chronic inflammatory load will help you to feel better and to have a much longer vitality span. Oh, here we are back to two of my favorite dead guys. Okay, so Louis Pasteur did not have a vibrant health span. He had his first stroke in his 40s, and he had some recovery, but then he died in his 70s of several organ failures. And but Dr. Beauchamp, the terrain theory proved itself because Dr. Beauchamp lived to ripe old up into the 90s, and but he made a big impact on Louis. It's well documented that on his deathbed, Louis Pasteur said, "The germ is nothing, the terrain is everything." So thank you very much. Gum disease is really the largest chronic inflammatory disease in the world. Now, it's also transmissible, transkissable, but there's good news. It's easy to get rid of. So I hope that you will just pay attention to your own mouth. The answer is very much, in your own hands. We now are in an era of decentralized medicine. There's now a saliva test that I just learned about because of a podcast. The CEO of a new company was generous enough to be a guest with me. And there's a test called the Bristle test, bristlehealth.com. And this is a saliva test that you can do at home. It's about half the price of the other one. And it's very, very comprehensive. It's going to show you not only bad bacteria, but also good bacteria, which really matter. It's going to show you some of the nitric oxide producing bacteria that are super important, that are often killed off with these really strong mouthwashes that so many people use. There's just a lot. You might listen to the podcast too of Bristle Health, Danny Granick. But if you want to order this test, he gave me a discount code Vitality 15 for $15 off. It's a really, really great test. So thanks for joining me. If you need biological dentistry, Dr. Dunnington is here to talk to. Please listen to the podcast. It's just my goal every week is to just help people be more empowered for a longer vitality span and to live with hope and to have better relationships. Thank you.